If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thankful for private property. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. If you have enough to eat this Thanksgiving, you should be thankful for the private property system that produced the food. We live in the most prosperous, fruitful time in human history. Let's take a brief look at how we got here. In October of 1621, Plymouth Colony Governor William Bradford called a 3-day festival inviting the 90 Indians to join his 50 pilgrims. This feast, which included times of thanks to God as well as athletic competitions and food and fellowship, is commonly considered the first Thanksgiving festival in America. So, if you celebrate it with football games and food with your neighbors, you are reenacting this cherished Christian tradition. But who were these pilgrims, and how did they get here? Fight or flight. That's the basic idea from psychology, that our minds are built to either change ideas we disagree with or run from them. It's a pretty big discussion among Christians in the United States today, or at least it should be. I delve into that question in podcast number 72, titled Two Worlds. Being in the world but not of the world is becoming more difficult in postmodern America. The Pilgrims' response was flight, as explained by David Barton at Wall Builders. He writes, "The Pilgrims are well known today for their association with the first Thanksgiving festival. The Pilgrims were separatists, a set of Protestants who felt that they would be unable to reform the Church of England, and therefore they chose flight over fight. They went to Holland and then eventually to America. But the other group who came later were Puritans. They were fighters who believed they could reform the Church of England. It turned out they were wrong, and following severe persecution, some 20,000 followed the Pilgrims to America. The Pilgrims had obtained a land grant for Virginia and set sail on the Mayflower on September 6, 1620. But after a rough ocean crossing, they landed 200 miles north of Virginia in what became known as Massachusetts. On November 11, 1620, they finally dropped anchor and came ashore. Grateful or entitled? Yeah, of the hundreds of books and articles I've read and the hundreds of speeches I've heard, the one that makes the most impact on today's subject is a little 5-minute video by Dennis Prager titled The Key to Unhappiness. He says there are two groups of people, those who are grateful and those who are entitled. The grateful will always be happy. The entitled will never be happy. And here's the strange part. He's a Jewish person who does not believe Jesus died for his sins. Think about it. A Jew is telling a Christian that he should be grateful. Kind of backwards, isn't it? I'm the one who should be telling him to be grateful. Okay, Jesus had to die for your sins because there is no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody had to pay, and it wasn't you. That's why Christians are grateful and why we celebrate Thanksgiving. We have a lot to be grateful for. You're welcome to feel sorry for atheists during this season. They have no one to be grateful to. I don't know how you can be grateful for without being grateful to. Oh, then the poor non-believer has to suffer through Christmas and not celebrate the birth of Christ. You know, for all we complain about the difficulty of being a Christian, this time of year, it's really quite a blessing. Our grandkids sometimes tell each other, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. Actually, that's pretty good Christian economic philosophy. Be happy for what you have. After all, being happy is not having what you want. It's wanting what you have. In our book, Biblical Economic Policy, Sergei Seidamatov and I mentioned this concept as one of the 10 commandments of economics, which we borrowed from the list by Moses. It's our number 4, and we call it Don't Covet. If you don't work. Now, the Apostle Paul wrote to the people in Thessalonica, he who won't work won't eat. The first Pilgrims had the same problem some 2,000 years later. William Bradford was the governor of the Plymouth Colony. Here's what he had to say about the socialism of the early Pilgrims. Quote, "By adopting the communal system, We thought we were wiser than God, end quote. That's true of socialists today. They think they're so smart that they can plan an economic system. No one is as smart as all of us. I often use this little diagram when I teach the power of markets in my class at Dallas Baptist University. The benevolent dictator would have to have perfect vision through two eyes, but it's spelled with the capital letter I because it stands for information and intent. Bradford thought he was wiser than God because he tried to plan a socialist system that would produce more than the market system. He found he was not as smart as he thought, and socialists since him have continued to try, but it never works. I unpack more of this in my podcast number 76, titled Central Planning Still Does Not Work. Yeah, it never did. Now, from kings in the Old Testament to the Romans in the New Testament, from William Bradford at Plymouth to Robert Owen in Indiana in 1842, from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to Vladimir Lenin, from Fidel Castro to Hugo Chavez, from Jeremy Corbyn in the UK to Bernie Sanders in the US Senate, they are all trying to be God, like Adam and Eve were. And what they all find is that if you eat the apple, you get poorer. If you award it as private property and allow humans made in the image of God to find creative ways to increase their production and be industrious and fruitful, the economy multiplies and everyone gets richer. Those fruitful pilgrims. Here's how Jerry Boyer explained it in Forbes magazine way back in 2008 in an article titled Lessons from a Capitalist Thanksgiving. Quote, the members of the Plymouth Colony had arrived in the New World with a plan for collective property ownership, reflecting the current opinion of the aristocratic class in the 1620s. Their charter called for farmland to be worked communally and for the harvest to be shared, end quote. Predictably, famine ensued, followed quickly by plague. Half the colony died. Unlike today's socialists, the Pilgrims learned from their mistakes. Then they gave each person a parcel of land as private property. The results were astounding and predictable, by the way. They were actually following the advice that would be written 150 years later by Adam Smith. Specialize, then trade your surplus. So men worked hard. Fields were not only tilled and planted, but also diligently harvested. They traded with the neighboring Indian nations and learned to plant maize, squash, and pumpkin and to rotate their crops from year to year. The harvest was bountiful, and the new colonists immigrated to the thriving private property capitalist economy, kind of like the folks crossing the southern border of the United States today. People want to live in a private property capitalist state. Private property. When I talk about the lack of private property in my sophomore class at Dallas Baptist University, students have a little trouble grasping the whole concept. They know that they have title to their car and their parents have title to their home. So to live in a society without private property and the attendant legal system to enforce it is frankly kind of beyond their level of understanding. That's why the Pilgrims were richer than the Native American Indians they encountered in the New World. Most Indians didn't believe in private property. They were mostly animists who worshiped the earth. You can find many of their philosophical descendants today in the modern world who worship the creation instead of the creator. As Hernando de Soto explains in his book, The Mystery of Capital, in the early colonial period of the United States, property owners marked the edges of their property by corn stalks in Iowa and hatchet marks on trees in New England. What de Soto so clearly explains in his book is how these common marking systems became standardized and codified into law. Private property and the laws that defend it are what makes nations wealthy, and it produced the first Thanksgiving. I'll close with an admonition from Mark Perry at the American Enterprise Institute. Quote, before we eat turkey this Thanksgiving, we should first thank private property rights, because they protect us from the tragedy of the commons that resulted in the starvation and death for the early Pilgrims' failed experiment with socialism. Without property rights, Thanksgiving Day would be Starvation Day. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.